Have you felt lost, lonely, or maybe even a little bit lonely? I talk about all these things on my show and how to help them. Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Mental Melodies. I'm your host, Carmynn Bradley. Thank you for tuning in and for liking and subscribing and all of those things. We've been working on a lot of changes, both at social media shows and with this show specifically, and it's just been really exciting to see how the show is changing and growing and developing, and how the viewers are just like jumping on board, and that's really, really cool. So like I say every week, I just really appreciate you and thank you for being here. Alongside the growth of the show has just been my own personal growth, and I've just really been leaning into the moment, and today I wanted to give myself that opportunity to lean into the moment as well. So I'm going to start by just kind of going back to last week and recapping what I talked about, because last week there was so much that I was pouring into that I wanted to revisit today, and I think it would be helpful just to touch base with some of the stuff I mentioned last week for those of you who maybe weren't able to tune in last week. And just in general, over the course of the last few months, I've been talking about healing, and then all these different topics that go along with healing. And I've brought up a lot of different stories about my own life, and I've been able to kind of conceptualize things for myself, and then just pull in stories to help people understand some of the concepts that I've been talking about. And a big one that came up for me that I decided to really hone in on last week was dealing with emotions, and specifically dealing with them like right when they show up, or dealing with something right when it happens. And so last week I shared that I lost my dog June, and so it's still pretty fresh, because last week it was just like 3 days, and now it's been about a week and a half, and I have been very, very busy. So I guess I tend to, on this show, stand in front of the camera, and I feel like I can give myself some credit for practicing what I preach, but I feel like in the last week I haven't really been practicing what I preach about dealing with things right when they show up, and I've been avoiding a little bit. But there is something also to be said about just how life often, it's funny because it's like life is getting in the way of life, you know? Sometimes you just don't have the time, or there's things that people are asking you to do, and so you can't deal with your emotional body or your own responses or triggers and all of that, because life is literally getting in the way. And I worked 6 days straight, and today is my first day off from work, so I feel like I kind of emerged from this like this stupor of just pushing through. And because of that, I've been kind of, emotions have been popping up about what happened when my dog passed, but I really haven't had the time to kind of sit with them and deal with them. And again, that's like against my advice totally, but I do. This reminds me of like the second episode when I showed up and I was like, guys, I am losing my mind right now. And I was able to acknowledge that while I feel like this show is the culmination of a lot of studies that I've done and experiences that I've been through, I'm not perfect, and I'm not here saying like, wow, look at all the things that I've done in order to heal, do these things and you'll be fine. I am still in the thick of my healing process, and I'm still figuring things out, and I still deal with a lot of like negative emotions and thoughts that I really don't want to deal with. But I mean, without those, I don't think that this show would be as lovely as it is, and I don't think that people would get as much out of it. And so I'm again like doing this thing where I go back and forth, and so here I am this week just feeling very worn down and exhausted, and wondering like if I was going to come up with the right words and all of that. And I kind of deal with that every single week, but less so as it goes on. And what I've been able to do, and a growth that I've seen in myself, is that I'm better able to just stand here and be in the moment and kind of surrender to what it is that I'm meant to say. And I've mentioned this many times, that I genuinely feel like the stories that I share and the topics that I cover are things that I am meant to talk about. And I am like very, very grateful for the degrees that I have and the experiences that I have. And I feel Different from some of the people that I've talked to who like have degrees but then decide to shift careers and they're like, wow, that degree wasn't worth it. I genuinely don't feel that way about my educational experiences. And while there is a lot of debt in my back pocket that I have to carry around with me for a while, I genuinely believe that I went through these experiences to become a teacher and to become a therapist for a reason, so I could be here, because I just have this beautiful opportunity to take all of the things that I've studied and then essentially continue to study them in real time in front of an audience. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think it's just such a beautiful thing. So anyway, I was talking about like my emotional experience this last week and how I felt like I've been um, avoiding my grief. And like I said, this goes in contrast to what I was saying last week about how we really need to like embrace the emotions right when they come up. But like I was saying, there's everybody has to deal with life getting in the way, right, of what's happening inside of their body. And everybody has to go out and make money and pay their bills and all of these things. And so I'm like dealing with these two different aspects where it's like, yes, I just experienced this loss, and there is a lot that I need to process with regard to it, and there's a lot of thoughts that come up with regard to it, but also like life doesn't stop. And last week, what I did a lot is that I compared my experience with losing my dog to losing my brother. And obviously, those two are not the same thing. And when I was sharing this with a friend, we were like, well, that's not like a very comparable example. But I think that it is. And it's also very useful, I think, with this kind of like mission that I have of helping people with their mental health issues to explain things from a trauma perspective versus from a like more normal perspective, right? And so something I was thinking about today, and even last week about bringing up in regards to these topics, is like the difference between micro traumas and like these macro traumas. So again, like I think that most people, when they hear those words, maybe not most people, I don't know, it depends on what language you live in, because I live in these different professions of mine in my head, you know. Maria and I are always talking about how we have our lingos, you know, like you have lingos for business and lingos for this and lingos for that. So micro and macro trauma, maybe you think of like micro and macro nutrients if you've been a bodybuilder or something like that. But essentially micro is small, macro is large. I don't want to like mom-splain to y'all, but it's important. Anyway, so like a micro trauma is something that maybe it was traumatic, but maybe it's more normal, and you can adjust healthily to micro traumas, unless you're somebody who already has a bunch of macro traumas that are like in your body and you're dealing with those on a daily basis. Then basically anytime you get hit with something, whether big or small, your nervous system is already overloaded. So it's like, how do you deal with that, you know? And I shared last week that like if June had died during a different part of my life, I would be a total mess. You know, I wouldn't be able to get up and go to work as early as I did. And so when I'm thinking about comparing these two different losses, the reason why I think it's so beneficial to hear these examples is because, again, you can give yourself grace for the times when you've been through something that was more like a macro trauma, like something that was huge that completely altered your life, you know? And so what I was thinking earlier about like post my brother dying was that I did feel that I had to jump back into life too quickly. And what often happens in grief or when somebody experiences a traumatic event is that they get all these people around them like right at the beginning, and then everybody else is not really going through what you're going through. So then they go off, you know, they drop off their flowers and their casseroles and their cards, and then they go off and live their life and they're feeling pretty much fine. And then you got all this support in the beginning. Thank you for the casserole. Thank you for the flowers. But now I'm dealing with this intense emotion, and what do I do with it? And so after my brother died, I was already overloaded. If you have an example of somebody who had already had all these different traumas, then I was hit with another macro trauma, right? If you think, oh, I love using examples of the ocean, and this is coming up for me again, because I think that emotions are like waves in our body, right? the robot at the Sphere talks about this when people ask her, do you feel emotions? Well, you can't feel emotions without a biological body, because emotions stem from your body. They stem from your nervous system, right? You get a trigger and then your body will feel the emotion, which is why it's so important to understand your body and to give yourself permission to be in your body, even for a moment or 10 minutes a day. Like if you spend 10 minutes a day just focusing on how your body feels, it's already going to change your experiences throughout your life. And I guess in saying that, that again helps me to give myself grace for not just like taking this whole last week to think about my loss. And I mentioned this last week too, where I said like I had initially thought that I needed to plan it out, like because I am who I am and because I understand what it's like to need to address emotions or address things right when they come to you, that I was already starting to like literally try and plan it out. Like, okay, if I take him and experience his death this day, then the next day I can sit and I can just feel it all, and then the next day I can rest, and then the next day I go to work. And it doesn't always happen like that. And so while it is pertinent to meet your problems head on or to meet your emotions head on, there's also this balance, like I always talk about, there's this duality of like, but you also need to allow it to come up naturally and allow yourself to experience the waves as they come. And so last week I was talking about like feeling sad right in front of the camera and then experiencing it and allowing it to flow through my body. But the difference is that, so if you're going through life and you're acknowledging your waves when they come up and you're allowing them to flow through you, like that's healthy. But sometimes you can be too busy to where you don't have the time to experience those emotions, and that's when they get stuck in your body. So this goes back to the book I mentioned last week. I'm listening to it on an audiobook very slowly. Sometimes I listen to chapters over and over and over again just to like hear those like little gems that come up that I want to mention on the show. And so in The Untethered Soul, he talks about that. And I listened to a new chapter today that was just such a good reiteration of this concept of how do you deal with emotions right when they come up. And I remember I asked last week, like, so what does it look like to push your emotions back down? How are we doing that? I think if we know how we're doing that, then we can get to the root cause of how to not do that, right? And so, like I mentioned, sometimes it has to be a very, very conscious choice that like you're sitting down for 10 minutes a day and you're examining how you feel. And then sometimes it's more of just like a promise you make to yourself that throughout the day, if I experience an emotion, I'm going to allow myself to feel it. There's so many different like things that can get in the way of that. So I'm going to pause there and then I will continue to talk about this topic right after the break. Feel free to leave comments or anything that's on your mind right now, and then I will see you back in just a couple of minutes.
Shut up and sit down.
I can't believe we're all moving to Vegas.
I know, right? It's a dream come true.
Wow, super creepy dude.
Mason, stop. I think he heard you.
What if someone walked up in the back of his semi?
She's gone. Someone took her.
Who's that creepy trucker?
What are you doing?
They call me Mother Trucker.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the second segment of this episode of Mental Melodies. I'm your host here, Carmynn Bradley. I am a former therapist, former high school teacher. I believe that I am a philosopher. I'm an intellectual. At my core, though, I'm a singer and a songwriter and an artist. But I'm here to share my experiences and a lot of the things that I've studied to hopefully just spread the message that healing is real. And I guess I'm a poster board girl for healing. And I've had a lot of different experiences that I believe that people can relate to. And I love that I brought up this idea of like micro versus macro trauma, because there's also like micro and macro mental health issues. And so I'd like to touch back on kind of this chapter I just mentioned in the last segment of The Untethered Soul, where he talks about how you can recognize like if you're mentally ill. And I think that mental illness and saying mentally ill sounds very strong. So this is what I want to emphasize today, that mental illness doesn't have to be PTSD. And that's why I love that I have this like comparison of these two losses in my life. And while losing June, my dog, has been a deep thing and such a change for me because of the growth that I've gone through, it has been a lot easier than I would have expected it to be. And also just because I knew that it was going to happen for a while, right? Last week I mentioned that my brother's death was very out of the blue. So not only was he a human being and my brother and we were very close and all of these things, but it was also a trauma. And I mentioned last week that PTSD does not mean that you experienced a trauma yourself. It could be that you had a loved one who was shot, stabbed, something like that, right? And then that affects you, and there is so much validity to the experience that happens within you. So anyway, there's just this difference between the Carmynn that lost her brother versus the Carmynn that lost her dog, and this ability that I have to be able to deal with things right when they come. So I started this episode not necessarily feeling guilty that I haven't been able to deal with my emotions in the last week, but just being honest about it, because like I mentioned in like the second episode, I came back and I was like, okay, let me acknowledge like the two different missions I guess I have here, where it's like I have this wealth of information and all these books that I've read and all these studies that I've done and all these clients that I've worked with, and I've had my own journey. And so let me give these gems to you, because I shouldn't be hoarding this information. I should be sharing it with people, you know? And then there's also this reality that every single episode I'm going to be a new person who has gone through new things, who has learned new lessons. And so I've asked for permission on this show to like give me space to change my mind, to come to conclusions, to develop new theories. And that has all been happening. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, like I just love that I have experienced a lot of growth, and that I am growing with social media shows as well. And we're doing all of this rebranding, and it's just been really, really awesome. So anyway, the episode or the chapter, I believe is chapter 8 in The Untethered Soul, reiterates how to deal with emotions like when they come up. And he gives this really, really great analogy that I wanted to share with you, which is like, imagine that you have a thorn. It felt like a very big thorn when he was talking about it. So anyway, you have this like big thorn somewhere in your body, and you don't want to hurt anymore. So you like build all these different apparatuses to avoid a person touching the thorn, or you sleeping on the thorn, or you feeling the thorn move. And it's just such a great example, because it kind of shows how illogical it is, how we ordinarily deal with things. So maybe you have a fear of something, and so you find a way to cope with that fear, and you change the way that you live your life in order to accommodate the fear that you have, or the guilt that you have, or whatever mental health issue you have that's coming up. And I'd like to reiterate that that doesn't have to be such a big thing. It can be something really, really small. Eventually I think it will grow bigger and get stronger when you avoid it, right? Which is the whole idea of why it's important to deal with it right when it hits you. But if you spend years and years and years just finding your own way to self-medicate or avoiding the feelings that you have inside, it's not going to get smaller, it's going to get bigger because it's like screaming to either be pulled out or be dealt with, right? And so he uses this great example to demonstrate that by avoiding the things that you really need to face, you're actually like making them worse. And also you're developing new ways of being that are dysfunctional. So this reminds me of what I've brought up a bunch of times about like how my eating disorder for a while was like my way of coping with the stuff that I couldn't handle. And so again, this is like, it's important to address whether or not what you're dealing with is like a macro trauma that you need to go to therapy for, or if it's something that you can just kind of handle on your own. So to reiterate what I was saying before the break about mental illness, another thing that this man brought up in The Untethered Soul in the 8th chapter was that you can identify like when you're mentally ill if you have like thoughts in your mind that are plaguing you. That's like one of the things that you can acknowledge. And so again, let's reiterate that mental illness does not have to be PTSD or borderline personality disorder or any of these like really major things that feel very long term and for some people feel very permanent. It can just be simply that you are, it's more like comparing yourself to cancer versus a cold. And he mentions, right, like when your body gets sick, what do you do with it? You have to rest or give yourself a humidifier or medicine or whatever it is. And a lot of us, we deal with a cold that way and it feels very normal. It's like, of course I would do that. Like I'm not feeling well. But then when we're mentally not feeling well, we usually avoid it. And so obviously it's just a beautiful, wonderful thing that there's more awareness of mental illness in our society so that we can have the permission to deal with it when it happens, you know? But like there's so many things that get in the way of that. And this is just reminding me of like how my last week was not exactly what I wanted it to be in regards to like being able to give space to myself. Like I haven't rested very much in the last weeks. I've just been working day in and day out to prepare for like a show slow time at the end of January. And while I know that it's necessary, that is not really the way that I want to live my life. And I've talked about this multiple times on here. Like I want to live slowly. I want to wake up in the morning and have time to myself, and I want to be able to play my music like multiple hours a day. These are all these things that I want, but the reality of the situation is that I can't always do that. And so again, just bringing back that kind of duality of like, here's all the things that I'm doing to deal with my emotions in a healthy way, and here's the ways that I'm trying to be an example to like younger generations or just anybody dealing with the stuff I've dealt with, but also here are my limitations, and here's how these limitations are affecting me. And that's so valid, especially when I like am saying to an audience, do these things to help yourself get healthy. You're probably trying to do them and also like running into roadblocks, and that's just such a natural thing. And so it's so important to validate ourselves when we simply like don't have the time to visit with our emotions in the right way. So I was talking about the thorn that he brings up in The Untethered Soul and the ways in which like we avoid that. And so there's this image that comes to my mind, which is kind of embarrassing for me. And it's interesting that I'm now like comparing these two different aspects of myself. I've talked about like past lives on this show, not in the sense of like before I was born, but just the various lives that I've lived in this lifetime. And I guess I quantify that by like thinking of the beginning and end of a certain version of me, and there have been all these different versions of me, right? And then I've talked about like taking the good and leaving the bad. So if I'm channeling a certain energy, like there's a version of me in high school that was super successful and not anxious and loved people and very much overworked, and there was a lot of negative and there was a lot of trauma back then, but I like to jump into like my 16, 17-year-old self sometimes and just give myself the strength and the feeling of that time, because I think we often limit ourselves once we get into our 30s. I think we have this vision of what it is to be old and all these limitations that you're going to have that I believe simply aren't true, and so sometimes I have to channel these different energies. But all of this to say that this image that I'm probably avoiding talking about by giving you all of these different stories is this image of like all of these messes in my house. And so I guess I'll give you the past story first. So like when I was in my early 20s and I was living alone in an apartment, I had June, and then I also had this other dog named Teddy, and I was working. I lived in Huntington Beach in California, and I was working in La Puente, so it was like an hour to an hour and a half drive there and an hour to 2 hours drive back, and I was exhausted, and I hardly had any time to take care of myself, much less my dogs. So I had messes everywhere, like puddles of dog pee and like pee pads that I couldn't deal with, and I'm closing my eyes because it's just so cringy, but admitting these things, I've talked about this before, especially in the episode when I brought JC on, where we were talking about acknowledging the mess, that when you open up and you share your mess, it eliminates the shame, because like it has more power when it's in your body. And less power when you speak it out, especially when you get a great response. And I don't know what you all are thinking hearing this, which I guess gives me power too, because I can pretend that you're like, yeah, I've been through that too, or like, who cares, or whatever. It's just, it's not a big a deal as you think it is, but it's a big deal when you sit in the shame of it and you just like let it simmer. So anyway, I had this period of time where my apartment was just, it was disgusting, and I didn't want anybody over there, and I was struggling a lot. I was struggling with my body image. I was exhausted from work. There was all just like traffic in California. Everything about who I was miserable at that time. Even when I was teaching, I was just tired, and I was just like going through the motions and trying really hard to basically, it felt like I was like surviving, and I was coaching cheer, and that was a whole mess. And I did not have enough time to deal with the messes in my house. And essentially, like, I see your environment as a microcosm of your mind, right? Like, if you have children and you have animals and you have all these things that you have to take care of, if you're not taking care of them, it's going to affect your mental health. And so I've talked about my journey to kind of like more minimalism. That's where I'm at now, where I have less and less to take care of at home. Because I mean, if you think about it, like once you buy a boat and you buy a house and you have all these different things and you have 5 kids, you're responsible for handling all of those things and nurturing all of those things and keeping them clean. So I think we have to really be honest with ourselves about how much we can take on. And so anyways, at that time I was taking on too much. And I'm experiencing, like, again, a micro, I guess these are my favorite words today, but like a micro version of this right now in my own space and in this experience with losing my dog. So for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there, and then I will continue on with this lovely story in just a couple of minutes.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
I was always smarter than the other kids. I matured at an early age. I was always a daydreamer, but I surprised my foster parent all the time.
You have come a long way, Cal. I'm proud of you.
As I learned by myself with no homeschool or public school, I was always alone as far back as I can remember. I'm an orphan and never met my real parents, and I never wanted to. Books soon became my new friends. They never talked back, and I could always rely on them to be there for me. Other kids my age made fun of me. They called me a freak because I knew more than them. I learned to keep my mouth shut. My foster parent didn't really pay attention to me while I grew up. He always thought I was weird.
I wouldn't be in this mess if it wasn't for you. You told me to drown my dad. What the fuck is wrong with you? How twisted are you?
You just murdered your father. They'll start looking for him. They'll eventually see the boat rocking alone in the lake.
Hey, do you need any carports or anything? What the hell are you doing on my property?
No, sorry, I was just leaving.
Then get the hell off my property. I don't need you and you little shits fucking up my property. Hey, do I know you?
No, I don't think so.
Are you Crop's son?
Yeah,
How's he doing?
he's okay.
Is he still drinking?
Hi everyone, welcome back. This is the third segment of this episode here of Mental Melodies with your host Carmynn Bradley. Thank you for tuning in and for continuing to listen, and again just for giving me the space to share some of these things. This image has been coming up a lot for me, and I knew that I was going to bring it up on the show. And one of the things I've been doing, which I mentioned at the beginning, is giving myself permission to be in the moment and to not plan as much and to allow what it is that I need to say to envelop. And this reminded me that earlier on in the episode I wanted to mention it, but it didn't feel like the right time. But I brought up the interview I had with Canvas Rebel magazine, which I need to share on Facebook, so I'll share it later so that you can read it. But I essentially talk about how writing songs is like that, where I have to really surrender and I have to let myself listen to the artistic voice inside of me that has the words for the song. And I was rewatching that reel from the first episode of the year where I talked about art being like a sculpture. It's so interesting because then, and I mentioned this before too, things pop up on my social media that humble me a lot, because I had this whole realization of yeah, writing songs is like sculpting, and then all of a sudden I see Tony Robbins has already said it, and that other one guy has already said it on his podcast. But I've mentioned how I need to be encouraged by that rather than discouraged. It's okay that your idea wasn't exactly the most original idea in the world. The beauty of it is that you are in this collective consciousness with all these other people who are trying to improve themselves. So of course they're having the same ideas that you are having, and I'm meeting a lot more people in my life who are thinking about the same things. And I just think about how there's so much space for everyone who wants to start a podcast or write a book, all of those things. Just because there are people out there who are already saying the things that I am realizing doesn't belittle my realizations. So anyway, I, again, am just giving myself permission to be here in the moment and to say what it is that needs to be said. And I think that that's so important. And being in the moment is so very difficult. And it's just such a struggle. But it just reminds me of what I kind of the point I'm making today, that we have to give ourselves grace, that, we might have things going on in our life, but we do have to deal with the reality of our situation. And I've even talked about this with regard to manifestation. You might want to be in a different era of your life, and it's so valid to go through the necessary motions in order to get to where you want to be, but you can't be living in the future all of the time. And you still have to accept that you're not there yet, and you have to give yourself the opportunity to grow into the person that you want to be. And that's can be very, very challenging, and it requires a lot of patience. And so I forgot the thing that I was going to say, that I was like, I'm going to say it. We'll see. I'm sure it will come back to me. But I was talking about, before the break, I was talking about kind of that embarrassing story of my apartment and how gross it was. And this is a spot I went back to a lot when I was like writing really as a way to heal. I remember I used to tell my students there's all these different types of writing. Like you can write in order to write a project, but you can also write in order to learn. Like if you write out your thoughts, you're learning. That's essentially what I'm doing here as I'm speaking out loud. It's like a way of writing to learn, where I'm saying all these words and my brain is making all of these connections and I'm coming to all these realizations. And that's why there's so much value in writing, not to create a product sometimes. Sometimes you just write just to write. And that's one of the ways that I think you can heal from stored up energies in your body. So I was talking about my space, and what happened in the last like few months of having June is that he was really, really sick. So he was like throwing up all the time, and I honestly did not clean it up every single day. Sometimes it was just way too much for me, and I was avoiding a little bit like the feeling of knowing that he was going to be gone. And I had been feeling that for a couple of years actually. Like he started getting sick even a while back. He had a lot of illnesses, and he was such a little dog. He had seizures for a while. Eventually those went away, but it was approximately 2 years ago when one time he was like vomited all over the floor, and I came home and it was just like really concerning because it was only 8 pounds and there was like so much vomit. And I did clean that up that time, went to the vet. They didn't say anything, just gave him like hydration pills. But it was during that time that I was kind of feeling like, I know he's really, really sick. And I thought it was kind of his time then. And I still ended up getting a couple years with him, which was awesome. But he would go back and forth between like being really sick and then seemingly healthy, until at the end it was just like compacted, where it was only a couple days of being really sick and then only a couple days of being really healthy, and back and forth and back and forth. And so for a while I was kind of unable to clean up after him because I was going to work and then coming back at midnight and I'm exhausted. And then the reality of the situation is that like his mess was reminding me that he was sick. And so when it got to the point where I realized that he was only like 5 pounds and he was supposed to be 8 to 10, I knew I had to take him to the vet, and I pushed it back a little bit. I think I might have mentioned this last week, or maybe even the week before. But anyway, I went to the beach for New Year's Eve, and I took him with me, and I was grateful to have that last like little trip with him. Because I think if I had gone to the vet before that trip, then I might not have had him with me through that, because they would have found the cancer then instead of later. But it was just this thing I was doing where I was like avoiding the mess because it was like too much for me to handle. And so now what I'm doing in this like process of grief and not having enough time to really do it is that there are like a few messes around me right now that I'm just kind of like tiptoeing around, and I really need to like clean up this last little stain that he had on the floor. But I was telling my friend, like, once I clean up that stain, that's the last stain I'll ever clean up from June. And it's this weird sadness surrounding that that's really, really interesting. And I wonder if it equates to like, you know, how people feel when they have family members who are sick for a while. Because what I was going through after losing June was this realization that like I actually experienced a lot of peace as well, because that there was no longer this constant mess that I was just like barely keeping up with. You know, it's just like I get up one day and there's more, and then I come back from work and there's more, and it's just like it was just this constant thing that was really, really hard to manage. And so I was just thinking about like our space and how it's so representative of our psyche. and that if we are unable to maintain the things that we have, then we're going to feel like bogged down mentally throughout our day. So that's why it's so important for us to do things like maybe finding minimalism if you haven't searched for that in your life, and like getting rid of things. And so I've talked about how like getting rid of things and avoiding attachment to things is one way of beginning to release like the cloudiness and the fogginess in your mind. And I'm just reminded that of this kind of theme today of giving yourself that grace, that you can't necessarily do that all at once. And the process to figuring out what it is you need to let go of is a really slow one. And it's taken me a really, really long time. And I'm still, I still have things that I need to like get rid of and let go of. And so I'm reminded of this concept that also came up in the Untethered Soul, but it was something I learned about back when I was doing yoga teacher training, and it's this idea of a samskara. And all that is really a label for like the emotions that are stuck in your body that I've brought up a bunch of times, right? If you are feeling an emotion and you're not letting yourself feel it, just kind of becomes like a thing inside of your body. It's this energetic presence that was supposed to flow through you, right? Because emotions are like waves and they're supposed to take you to the shore. Like you feel it, oh man, I'm sad, now I've landed and I feel grounded again. But if you don't go through that motion, then what happens is it gets stuck. And it can get stuck in various different places. I think this is about where I left off last week. I remember because I was like, wow, there's so much to talk about here. I can't do it in 5 or 10 minutes or whatever. Because one of the chapters in the Untethered Soul is like specifically about an energy block in the heart. But it was a little bit limited, in my opinion, because he does touch on energetic centers in the body. And so in yoga, when you hear about energetic centers, we call them chakras. And there's different ways of thinking of these. Like in acupuncture, they have different words for it, but it's the same idea. The whole purpose of acupuncture is to find those points where that energy is stuck, and then your body can release them. And the beauty of that is that your body can release some stuff without you being aware of it. And I remember mentioning this last week, that you can, for example, go to yoga or acupuncture or even a massage or even take a bath. All of these different ways of like relaxing energies in your body. You can get rid of some energy in your body without being aware of where it came from. On the flip side, there are some energies I believe that you cannot let go of without first seeing where they're from and knowing where they came from. And so that goes back to what I've mentioned about like childhood trauma. If there is deep like sexual trauma from childhood or physical or emotional abuse from childhood, it might come up in your body and you might be able to release it. But for the most part, there's a part of you that holds on to that energy that isn't the you now, right? We talk about like past selves. I've talked about parts in memory therapy. In parts in memory therapy, you go into your subconscious and you find like the 5-year-old self and you ask it, what are you feeling? And it'll tell you, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling neglected. Those are the emotions. So to go to that word that he used in the Untethered Soul, these samskaras that are stuck in your body. And you, it's not you consciously letting go of them. It's the part of you in your subconscious letting go of them because they're so deeply rooted, right? That's the difference between, again, like the traumas, the macro traumas and the micro traumas, because I might not have had the time to deal with every sad wave this last week that has come up about June, or every guilty thought about how like I might have been responsible for his lifespan not being as long. I might not have had that time, but this is not going to be something that sits in my body forever, where it's a trauma where 10 years later I'm just like completely derailed by the death of June. No, I'm going to be able to deal with it, because even in the moments where I've been really busy this last week, I can still feel it when it comes up. I will probably have like a big wave once I'm done with this stretch of like working so much, so like next week or something, I'll probably have a big wave and cry a lot and feel it out and come back to the shore. But at the end of the day, I'll feel better and I will reach a state of acceptance. But that's something that you have to go through sometimes for years before you heal something that is so deeply rooted in your subconscious, or something that you went through when you were like 5 that you didn't deal with. And again, that's the difference, right? Some things you deal with right away. Some things you have to deal with later on. in a perfect world, you would be able to deal with that right away, but how can you? If you have trauma when you're 5, there's no way you're going to know how to deal with that, because what's happening is your caretakers are not giving you the tools to deal with your emotions then. Perhaps they're the ones like giving you the trauma. So that's just almost a whole other subject for a whole other day. So I was talking about how in the Untethered Soul, he gives you this example of when your heart gets blocked and energy getting stuck there. But again, that's limited because you have energy centers all up your body. So your heart can be blocked, but so can your sexual energy, and so can your energy of like follow through and getting things done sits like in your stomach. And so if you think about if you have been really depressed and you haven't been able to follow through on projects, and you also maybe have physical like extra weight here or GI issues, that means energy is stuck here, and so on and so forth. And you can have energy stuck in your throat, which affects your ability to speak your truth. I believe I have mentioned this before, but I just know last week I wanted to kind of touch on it. So that's a good space to stop here. So I will give you some more information about like these energy systems and how to unblock them after our very last break of the day.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Mental Melodies. This is your host here, Carmynn Bradley, and this is our last segment for the day. Thank you again for tuning in and listening and subscribing and commenting and all of those things. Please continue to share. And if you have any feedback for me, you can send that my way as well. I mentioned in the beginning of the episode just how grateful I am to watch myself grow and to grow with the show, and to watch the show grow, and to watch people just like saying things. And it's important for my viewers who relate to me, but also for me, when I hear that people are relating to me, it helps me too. And so there's this kind of balance of like the selflessness of I'm going to give you all the tips that I have, and also the selfishness of like, this is for me and I get to rant for an hour and I love it and it helps me very, very much. And that's one of the ways that you can, again, like release energy in your body, is being able to talk through things. Because I was mentioning that you can like go to yoga and get a massage, and there are various different ways to deal with like the energy that gets pent up in your body. And that was kind of where I left off last week, which was, okay, like it's great and all to get that advice. Like in the Untethered Soul, he's like, just don't push it back down. Like, just feel it. And I'm like, okay, but that's obviously not that easy, because if it were that easy, then everybody would be doing it. And I don't think that everybody is doing it. And oftentimes what happens is maybe you think you're feeling the emotion, but really you're feeling like the emotion that is on top of the actual emotion. There's this anger iceberg that I used to give clients when they were dealing with anger, and anger is understood to be a secondary emotion. I don't know if I agree that it's always a secondary emotion, but this is definitely something a lot of therapists tell their clients. Like, it's a secondary emotion, so if you're angry, you're probably sad. And this might be true every time, but I just think about how like I don't know, kids get angry. So I think if kids get angry, then it might be more of like a primary emotion. But anyway, I'll think of that later. Like I said, some of my theories are just not fully fledged out, and I will learn about them later. But the idea that anger is a secondary emotion is helpful for people, because if you think about like I'll use me for example instead of generalizing. When I am so overloaded that I'm exhausted, I don't have the energy to listen to anybody else or even to really be at work, but I have to be at work, I feel frustrated, angry, and irritated more than I feel anything else. And that is because what I'm actually feeling is this exhaustion, right? I'm so tired. What I really want to be doing is I want to be home relaxing, but I'm here at work. And so that manifests into all these different emotions, which is your body's way of like processing what's happening. And what's really happening is my body's telling me, you're really angry at this person that you actually like, because you shouldn't be at work. You should be home relaxing. So again, to like the grace I need to give myself that, well, I still do have to like feed myself, and I still want to be able to like buy the hair color so that I feel pretty, like all these different things. I have to have a job if I'm going to exist in this world. So sometimes I'm not going to be able to perfectly execute in the way that I wish that I would. Wouldn't it be great if every single day I could get up and slowly drink some water and drink some coffee and take a bath, and then like sit with myself and meditate for 2 hours, and then do yoga for 4. This is literally like what my day would look like if I could do this every day. And then I would start to play my guitar, and then I would write music well into the night, and I would get up and I would repeat that. And I would take care of myself, and I would feel my emotions, and then I would do what I wanted to do, and I would write my music. And again, that would be day in and day out, and I would be so happy and blissful. But that is not the reality of my situation right now. It is something that I'm looking forward to, that I'm manifesting, that one day I can make money doing what I want to do, that I will be able to write music and produce it. And I'm well on my way to doing that. But again, with the one aspect of manifestation is that you have to feel the energy of your future self, but you also have to be in the reality of this moment. And you can't be constantly living in the future, because that's as toxic as constantly living in the past, right? So I've gone through these kind of 2 waves in my life, where for a while I was constantly living in the past, and that's because of trauma, right? That's because of these things that were in my body that I needed to deal with. And then I got to the point where it was like, then I was just over planning. And now I'm finding this balance of like, okay, I need to plan, but I also just need to surrender to the moment. That's something I mentioned multiple times. Like my idea going into 2024 was this exact balance of, here's the things I want to focus on, here's the things I want to finish, here's the various talents that I want to let grow, here are the interactions that I want to have, here are the places that I want to go so I can travel, but also here's this blank board that reminds me that, for one thing, a lot of things are out of my control. And I need to accept that and surrender to the many things that might come to me. And we can limit ourselves by planning, right? If I plan out every moment of every single day, then I'm not leaving myself open to new experiences and relationships and things like that. And I think that's actually, I know that it is, now that I'm like fleshing it out right now, is that over planning can often be a coping mechanism, right? So when I'm talking about that thorn example in that chapter of The Untethered Soul, where he's like, you have all these different apparatuses. One thing that I did when I had an eating disorder in college is that what that started to look like before it became full-fledged eating disorder was me like controlling all of my time. And I mentioned that it was partially because I was thrown into college without any real guidance. And so when you have your life planned out for you in high school with all these different like clubs and stuff, then you get into a space where you have all this time, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I started just filling every hour, and I was just studying mostly or working out mostly. And so that was actually something that while it's been a saving grace for me, being able to plan and being able to think about my days and my times and my hours and organization and all that, it was also a coping mechanism for me as a way of avoidance and as a way of avoiding rest, like specifically, and other things that I was feeling. Because if I essentially plan out my whole life and then I have to do these things, then I'm avoiding those opportunities where like my body might be speaking to me. And so I didn't know how to listen to my body, and instead I was forcing my body into things, right? And that's why it's so interesting that like exercise can be positive and it can also be negative, and you have to like find a balance of, what are you doing and why are you doing it? I was thinking about this yesterday. I think it was about like, I think that why you do things does matter very, very much. Like I used to go to the gym to change my body and change what it looked like, and I was doing it because I didn't feel satisfied with my body. And while working out could help me and it could be a whole release of energy, it didn't give me what it could have given me, because essentially I was fueled by the wrong thing. And so I'm thinking about what I was saying about how anger can be that like secondary emotion. I think a lot of the things that we can do are almost like secondary. Like really underneath the surface, we're feeling a different kind of way, or our body needs something we don't realize that we need, but because we're fueled by the external emotions or the things that stem from the stuff we're really supposed to face, we're like living in this almost like this secondary world that's not very grounded. Like if you're motivated by this feeling that your body's not good enough, that's often like living in the past. It might stem from something somebody said to you when you were 7 or 12. And so really it's like the feeling that's driving you might be this feeling of rejection that you got when you were 7 or 12 and now you're 32, and you think you're happy because you have experienced all this success in whatever it is that you're doing, but in actuality what you need to do is go in and face that 12-year-old feeling and let that go. Imagine if you let go of all of the emotions that are sitting in you and all of those different, like I brought up an image when I was talking to JC of just like ponds, but like dirty, scummy ponds, you know, like you have all these dirty, scummy ponds with these negative emotions that are just like growing inside of you. And if you are able to heal those and let them go and tend them and allow that again to feel those emotions and let them flow through you, you're going to feel lighter and it's going to free you up. And it will take away all the nonsense in your brain that is essentially like giving you the wrong idea of what to do and what to focus on. But anyway, that's like a lifelong journey. And so I'll go back to what I said I was going to talk about before the break about like energy centers and how, again, like the getting blocked in the heart is not the only place that you can get blocked. All the different chakras, the first chakra is your ground chakra, and that exists like somewhere in the low part of your spine and your sacrum. I was like, where do I find it? It's in the low part of your sacrum. And that is the energy that if it, let's say that it's blocked, you're not going to feel grounded, or maybe you'll feel stuck, which is kind of like, if you think about it, these energies, I'm not explaining this very well right now, but the energy centers are supposed to be spinning, but they're supposed to be spinning at like a nice balanced rate, and they can spin the other way and you can be like off the charts in one way, or it can spin one way and you can be like completely blocked. So there's like two different ways you can be out of whack. Of course it would be duality, because that's my whole thing. So anyway, if you can either be like so stuck that you're depressed and you need to release energy there, or you can be like not grounded at all, and that might be when you have like no energy there and all of your energy is up here, and that's when oftentimes you're living like in the future or you're living in the past and you're not living in the present. So if you're fixing energy there, you are going back to being grounded. And this is why this energy center specifically, like the best way to deal with it is embodiment and like yoga and doing all of those things so that you can feel in the moment, and again like then deal with things when they come. And then the energy moves up and you have your second chakra, and this is your sexual energy or your creative energy. And again, it can get totally blocked where it's like not spinning at all, or it can spin out of control. So if you're spinning out of control in that area, you don't have a lot of boundaries, or maybe you have like too many sexual partners, or you feel like you can't say no. These are all manifestations. And so now this is reminding me of like, why does this matter with regard to what I've been talking about? And I want to give you another book recommendation. It's a tome. If you don't know what that means, because I don't know if people are readers like me, but tome means like a giant book. And it's called Eastern Body, Western Mind. And it talks about basically a combination of healing through Eastern practices, but also the knowledge of Western psychology. So if you have issues in that chakra specifically, what's happening is maybe you had like sexual trauma when you were a kid. And so I bring that up because I did. So this is a huge one for me, where I have been either completely blocked in that area or completely out of control in that area. So like if you think about it, just because you know that this energy center isn't working well, that's not enough in that situation. Because if it stemmed from like a childhood trauma, you have to go back and deal with that, and that can be really, really hard. So I'm thinking about like why it's so beneficial to go to therapy, and that's kind of what I started the first segment with, that one way to let go of energy is to talk about it. that's not enough. You can talk about it forever and ever and ever, and then again, like essentially all that energy can still kind of float back into your body, because you have to talk about it, bring it to your awareness, but then acknowledge the feeling and feel it in your body. And it's almost like you have to feel that feeling for your 5-year-old self, or for your 12-year-old self, or whoever it is that had that trauma enacted upon them. So this to say that healing is not easy, and there are a million different things to think about with regard to it, and there are a million different things that you can do. But I guess what I've learned over the last couple weeks is this, I don't know, I guess my main thing for today was just like giving myself grace, that I want to find this balance of being able to deal with things right when they come, but also accepting that I have limitations and that there are still ways that I avoid issues, you know. And I'm reminded of the spiral that I mentioned last week, where healing is not just like, for one thing, if you're going around in circles, you're not healing at all. And then a lot of people think, well, it's just a path. Like I'm walking away from that, and then that's my next step. But it's more of a spiral. And one comparison I didn't bring up that has worked for me so much recently is that it's more like a video game. So there's one like that sock puppet video. I'm not a video game person, but I played a few with my ex, and it put this image in my mind. When you reach a new level in a video game, there's still all these different trials you have to go through that are similar from the last level, but there are some levels that you won't go back to. And so when you're going up this spiral of healing, you're going to revisit these lessons over and over again, but hopefully you've released enough energy that they're less intense the next time that you reach them. And if you're continuously growing, then you have the wisdom to face that lesson from a different perspective, like the next time, right? And then eventually you'll stop learning some lessons, because you really will like learn them in a way that is more final, and you'll be able to close the door on some things, which frees you up. Like the biggest thing I've talked about that I feel like I've healed from more than anything is like my eating disorder thoughts. And it wasn't like, okay, now I'm done, I don't have an eating disorder anymore. It was, wow, I'm free from some of those things, but I still experience some body image issues. But what that did was it freed me up for other traumas to work through and other ways of being to change. And so it's just this whole journey. But there has to be a balance of, you know, if you're on a healing journey, there definitely has to be a balance of you healing and you changing yourself, but also you giving yourself grace to like live, you know. So give yourself grace to live, but also commit to one or two things in the next couple of weeks that you can do to face something that you need to face, or give your body something that it needs to have, so that you can feel healthier and happier. That's it for me today. Thank you for listening, and just continue to listen and share. Reach out to me if you have any comments, and if you want to come on the show and maybe give me some of your healing experiences, just email me, Carmynn Bradley. Actually, nope. Take that back. Email me at mentalmelodiestalkshow@gmail.com. I just created that one, so you can send your stuff there, and I will see you in just 1 week. Have you felt lost, lonely, or maybe even a little bit loony? I talk about these things on my show and how to help them. Mental Melodies, broadcasting live every Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. and every Saturday at 11.